Betsy and Thomas here for the American Intelligence Media. Now, folks, what it is I've come here because Thomas is getting ready to get on the phone with one of these alt media personalities who's kind of testing him out to see if he's the real deal and has some questions for him. Now, we're going to be eavesdropping. Is that okay with you, Thomas?
Betsy, you're the boss. I do what you tell me to do.
Okay.
So yes,
Well,
Betsy, if it's okay with you, it's okay with me.
Because basically what they want to know is if Trump is deep state. Is that what they're really asking?
Yes.
Okay, so when you get finished, maybe we'll recap to see if we missed anything. But other than that, thank you for letting us eavesdrop.
Harry, that is a great question. Many people have asked this, and I'm so glad you did because Betsy tells me that this is a question that comes up a lot, and people don't understand it because they see that Trump is hiring true, absolutely magnificent deep state operatives. Why is he doing that? And then how did he get in office? How could he have not been working with the deep state and get in office, seeing the power that they had and the absolute grip that the Clinton cartel syndicate really has on America? These are great questions. And then you also asked the question of whether or not there was manipulation of the voting. Yes, there was manipulation of the voting, and that's been brought out in the news. And we know that at least 3.5 million votes were defraud. They were fraudulent votes in 17 states. And that's the first part of the investigation. We've written on that, and we showed how that happens. But to go back to the question, is Trump deep state? Well, here's the deal. In 2000, Roger Stone came and tried to convince Trump to become president. And each presidential election after that, Roger Stone came and begged. And eventually, the whole world kept asking Trump, Oprah and others all over, are you going to run for president? Because you're always talking about political things and making your political stance known. And, you always have a remark and an opinion on everything. And, you turned to the networks and said, your shows really stink. I can create a show that'll be the number one show. And what happens? Bingo, number one show every year that he wanted it to be. And when we remember that the White House is nothing more than a publicity stunt, it's PR, it is a Hollywood Disneyland production. And it doesn't matter who runs, it matters how good they look and who writes their speeches. So, did Trump have alignment? Yes, he did. Remember who his first supporters were? Michael Flynn. Who is Michael Flynn? He got in a fight with Obama. He was the director of intelligence for the military. And he was on the National Security Council, and he disagreed with Obama, and he got kicked off. Remember, Obama got rid of more active generals than any president in history, probably as many as all combined. He decimated the military. So the military certainly did come to Trump, and they probably came to Trump long before the time that he ran and said, look, we've looked at you, which Comey did as soon as they really knew Trump was running. The FBI did a full investigation on Trump and couldn't find anything except one thing, which I may refer to later, and that is a person named Felix Sater. Remind me if you wish to hear about Trump's only true Russian collusion is, in fact, James Comey's asset working for the FBI, and his name is Felix Sater. And so there is one Trump collusion. It's called Trump Soho. He built it with Russian money. So what? That's the only Trump collusion. So is Trump connected with the military before he ran for office? Absolutely. And the reason I can tell you that is the following. It can be demonstrated by looking at the 5-year plan of the Office of the Director of National Intelligence, which at that time that the 2017 report came out was being ran by James Clapper. The name of that report is called The Paradox of Progress. It's a 5-year assessment of everything the entire 17 intelligence agencies all put together, and it's a recommendation basically to the White House and for policy for basically domestic and international policy. Now, this is a public document, but it's only been public for a number of years because America was no longer America. Our intelligence agencies reported to the world. And so Trump was approached by the people who knew what was in that. You can read it, you can get it anywhere by plugging in Paradox of Progress. And when you read it and you understand the language of it, you will see that Trump was predicted, that Hillary going far left was predicted, and that a socialist candidate running was predicted. It also predicted what would happen if Hillary won. It didn't name them, but it characterized these three different factions. And they basically said that the progress of America is a paradox because they don't know what's going to happen. Well, this was well known by Roger Stone, Paul Manafort, and Kelly and Black. Now, remember who Stone, Manafort, of course, the Paul Manafort that's being attacked by his actually good friend Robert Mueller. So who is Stone, Manafort, Kelly and Black, I believe, are the other two, but they really don't work together much anymore. Everyone knows that Roger Stone is the one who convinced Trump to run, and also to later, he actually helped manage his campaign, and then he was kicked off the campaign because he had some communications back and forth with Guccifer 2.0. And now Roger Stone, along with President Donald Trump, is being sued for some kind of nonsense in relationship to the fact that Roger Stone sent a few text messages back and forth to Guccifer 2.0 on a completely public internet line. So, Roger Stone, who is Stone and Manafort? Paul Manafort helped take Viktor Yanukovych after the George Soros Orange Revolution of the Ukraine took him down from being president and got him elected a few years later to be prime minister. And a few years later, Paul Manafort got him elected to be the president of Ukraine again after he had been kicked out. Now, look again. Paul Manafort put 3 presidents into the into the White House. Paul Manafort runs, and always did run, the corrupt Republican campaign election funds. So when Trump wanted to get elected, and he turned, and Roger Stone came begging to him again and again, of course Trump said, well, do I get to use Boston Analytics, and do I get to use Stone, Manafort, Kelly, and the other ones that are connected to Manafort and Stone? And they said, yeah, absolutely. That's how presidents are made. On the other hand, you have John Podesta and his brother, Tony Podesta. They're the Democrat president makers. These are oppositional groups that create oppositional research, that are lobbyists, that are such powerful lobbyists that Paul Manafort was only the campaign manager for Donald Trump for 4 months, but he got him through the Electoral College vote, which not one single electoral vote went bad on Trump when they were promising that a great deal of them would. How did Paul Manafort come in and in 4 months, while still being investigated by the FBI, the CIA, using NSA surveillance, by the Director of National Intelligence Office, and by the U.S. Department of Treasury? There were 5 investigations currently on Paul Manafort when he came to work for Trump, and no one told him. Well, that's completely unethical, if not borderline illegal, and if not collusion, and if not absolutely illegal. Anyway, Paul Manafort got him through, didn't he? Oh, well, who got Trump actually through the Republican National Convention? Reince Priebus. Later, deep stater Reince Priebus was then let go of because he was we assume, he was one of the big leaks. He was working against Trump. Trump uses anyone he can. He is from New York. He is a barracuda of real estate in New York, the toughest real estate market in the world, and then he took it global, and he's had some failures, and he's had mostly successes. So for those people who don't understand that Trump runs with the pack, and he uses the pack, because if you don't use Goldman Sachs, you will not get anything done, period. Certainly not internationally, and not in and not in America either. So you have to work with the corrupt ones. But look what happened to Nikki Haley. She's appointed by Trump and she's nice as can be. She goes into the UN and then she stands up against Trump and says what? Many, many bad things against Trump. And Trump says, I'm going to defund the UN by 50%. And she goes ballistic. She yells at Trump. She calls him names, everything imaginable. What happens in the end? His number one supporter in the UN, Nikki, was happy when he took away $24 billion from the refugee program. Ended our major partition in the World Health Organization. Is going to end in the end, he will end our participation in the World Trade Organization, which is UN, the World Bank, which is the UN, and the International Monetary Fund, which is the UN. And Nikki Haley will support all of it. Why? Because he will fire her if she goes beyond a certain point. He will fire Kelly. He will fire anybody except his family. He is not really a deep stater, but he works with all the deep staters. What is Trump about? Trump is about creating, as he has seen come out of the White House, a lineage that his family would continue, that it is his dynasty. That's what he told us, and that's what he did. And why are we surprised by that? And why are we surprised that he surrounds himself with the military? Yes, he has the military behind him and did before he went to office, because the military had been decimated by Obama, and he, for at least 16 years prior to that, publicly had made many statements in support of the military, done many kind deeds, and been a philanthropist, not only as a civil rights leader, but also as a leader for veterans' rights and many other things which are swept under the table these days. So is he working with Rothschild? Well, Rothschild one of his banks did in fact bail him out when he had one of his bankruptcies. So is he a Rothschilder? No. Is Jared Kushner a George Soroser because George Soros invested in his venture capital group in New York City? No, everybody invested in that. Who cared? He didn't even notice probably George Soros is on the list. Would Trump like to have done more business with the Russians? You bet your booties he would have. Everybody, and especially the Clintons and Obama, loved the Russians and did everything they could to be Putin's bedfellows. Now, did Trump want to get Trump Towers in the state of the Russian Ukrainian province of two different Ukrainian provinces, the Georgia and Moscow? Yes. 4 times James Comey's plant, Felix Sater, took Jared Kushner and Ivanka and walked around those towns and said he knew Putin and was going to build Trump Towers there. This is the guy who helped Trump with some Russian investment funds build Soho Towers in New York. Yes, so what? Here, let me tell you about Russian collusion. How about one of the heads of Gazprom, the largest and richest board of a gas company in Russia? His name is Leonid Blavatnik. He became a British citizen, then he became an American citizen. Now he's the second largest donor to the Democratic Party. Is he Russian? Is that Russian collusion? Is that Russian influence? Russians are our friends. Obama put sanctions on them because of political reasons. So, is Trump a deep stater? No. Is he connected to... He isn't yet. Will he be in the future? He might. He might turn to the dark side. He hasn't needed to so far. He's basically got in the ring and one at a time, as a contender, is fighting for the heavyweight belt, and he has knocked out every person who's come in the ring. You can't name someone who's come up against him who didn't lose, including the totalitarian communist leader of China that we are trying to act like he's running a capitalistic organization over there. He won because he brought North Korea to the table. And he won because he brought China to its knees. And he's won against everybody. You can't name someone who's come up against him on purpose that he hasn't won against. So, would he win against the deep state? Only one at a time. Is he winning against Robert Mueller? Some would say he's miserably losing, so how can he be a deep stater? Is he winning against Comey? Comey was bragging up until a few days ago that he was considering, he was implying, that he was considering becoming the president. Okay? You see, a lot of people who said they were going to become president, they're all on the run now, not because Trump went after them, but because they attacked him. So he is not part of the military-industrial complex. He's part of his own, I'm sorry to have to say this, but he's a greedy businessman and he's a capitalist par excellence. He knows the system, but he did not know how bad it was until he came into power. And when he came into power, he's beginning to wake up. And basically he knows anybody that he fires or anything he does will be scrutinized so horribly that it will be a battle. So he's picking his battles, but he would not be a deep stater and write his executive order that did an in run around the DOJ and the FBI and put 13, seized the assets of 13 international criminals and probably seized the assets of 39 others we don't know the names of. He would not have asked for the Intelligence Department with his previous executive order just before that, demanding that within 30 days Dan Coates completely restructure our entire intelligence community and make sure that all surveillance of American citizens is ended. And going back to the 1978 laws and the 1945 laws, which we actually recommended to him, and that's exactly what is in that executive order. And that's because it's sensible. After 1978, the intelligence community became corporate. So is he against the deep state? He is in a war, as Michael Flynn characterized to everyone. There is a war between the corporate intelligence world and the military intelligence world. Trump is on the side of the military. So is he part of the military deep state? Well, I guess you could say so. But remember, the people who make money off providing stuff to the military are corporations, and they're international corporations. They are anti-American. They are internationalists. They're globalists. They're transnationalists. They work out of a group called the Highland Forum and In-Q-Tel and SAIC and Leidos and DARPA. These are all private investment companies using U.S. taxpayer dollars for innovation, patent theft that then turns around and militarizes it and gives it to the corporate intelligence world that then gives it to the rest of the world. Remember, Raytheon and a bunch of industrial military complex corporations and Silicon Valley corporations just went and created a city outside of Moscow that modernized Moscow and brought them into what you would call direct capitalistic competition with us. So it is a scam what is going on. Trump is playing scammers. Do you think he can tell you the truth? Do you think he's going to in any way show his cards? Do you think he is going to tell you what he's up to? Don't plan on it. That's like saying you're going to go into a business deal with Trump and you're going to walk out ahead. No, you're not. One way or the other, he is going to play you. And if he has to say one thing to an evil person to get them in the job to then say, I know who you are, you Goldman Sachs, okay, I won't use the name that comes to mind, warlord bankers who have ripped off every country in the world. I know who you are, but I also know you have power right now in the U.S. Treasury, in the Exchange Stabilization Fund, in the U.S. Fed, and I know I have to work through you to manipulate them. And he has. You can't name an area that he hasn't had victories in, at least partial, and moving towards very large victories, some of the largest victories we've seen in history. He cannot possibly be part of the Bush-Clinton family cartel, Obama cartel. The Bush-Clinton Obama cartel is basically presidents who go rogue afterwards. George Bush went after oil and gold. Baby Bush is an idiot. He just did what his dad said. Clinton went after patents and trade and got trade with China that basically ruined America. That's the reason we're in the condition we're in. Then the Clintons sold out everything when they got out of, they sold everything while they were in office, fire sale. They got out, everything goes through their foundations. We don't know how much money they collected, but for sure, every penny that came through their foundation when she was the Secretary of State was a violation of the Emolument Act. Every penny. He is not part of that. I don't care if a pig ran against Hillary Clinton. I would have voted for the pig. But we didn't have a pig. We actually have one of the only men who has withstood people assaulting him for him being bombastic and egotistic and a true capitalist, a bloviating, proud, true capitalist, exactly as they're supposed to be, by the way. That's what we're all trained to be as robber barons, aren't we? Aren't we trained to be Silicon Valley cut out boy kings who basically use economic terrorism to rule the world, aligned with the military. I mean, isn't that the way of capitalism? So he didn't go that way. He's only finding out how deep and bad it is. But you can bet your booties he knew all about the Fed and the New York Fed and the 5 brokers they use and the 5 CIA banks. He knew all of that. How do you think he's keeping the stock market going up? If you think that's by accident, you're incorrect. If you think that Trump is an accident, you're incorrect. Read The Paradox of Progress. They predicted Trump. They said if a person came out to the far right that attacked radical Islamic terrorism, that preached nationalism, that preached practically isolationism, that preached supporting the military, everything Trump had as his planks, that preached a strong border, that preached immigration, they could possibly win. But they said the one that could possibly upset him was the one that would go to the far left and become a socialist, i.e. Bernie Sanders turning into a socialist and declaring that even FDR was a socialist and socialism is cool. And he ran as a socialist under the Democratic Party because he read the same report. The same report was read by Hillary Clinton. And so the deep state knew they were in a fix. And Trump came in, and here's the deal. They had 2 candidates that they could have run as the Hollywood Idol winner. Donald Trump and Oprah Winfrey. Oprah Winfrey, they would have had to hide her past, and they would have had to run Bernie as a socialist on her ticket. A Democrat woman, black, and a socialist crazy man. That would have won. But Hillary was too greedy, and George Soros had too much invested, and the deep state had too much invested. And we've revealed who the deep state is. Trump knows these things now, but I do not believe in my heart of hearts that he knew how bad America had become when he decided to run for office and believe Roger Stone and use the power of Roger Stone and his lobbying and use the power of Paul Manafort and use every person who came along except his own family, his own dynasty. And I still predict to this very day he will be a 2-term president and one of his family will then be the president after that. Why? Because we're seeing the end of the Democratic Party with the DOJ and FBI collusion. If he was deep state, they would not have exposed themselves so terribly that it literally bleeded right into now what is sedition, what is treason, what is the Robert Mueller investigation, which is nothing more than a continuation of the counterintelligence actions of James Comey through the FBI counterintelligence department, through William Presapt and Larry Struck, and through the Department of Justice, through John Carlin, who ran the National Security Division. So what we're seeing now is the revelation of Hillary's sins. That's what we're seeing, and the cover-up. And that cover-up has been going on since Hillary started with that same group of people, as I pointed out to you, in the early 90s. So to answer the question, is Trump a deep stater? No, I don't think he's a deep stater. Could he turn to be a deep stater? He might. For heavens knows, we saw that the Bilderbergers, the CFR, the Bohemian Grove, and every other one, the Trilateralist group, all met and they all said the same thing. We don't know what to do with this disruptive force, this wrecking ball. He's ruining everything. We have to devise a plan. They did not come up with a plan. They haven't spoken a word. And a year later, another meeting, no words. The CFR is practically silent. Yes, and I said to you, and if I didn't, I should have, the answer to all your questions were yes, 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 and yes, and yes, and yes. You absolutely, I agree with everything you said. I was just, making my emphatic Thomas Paine, who is Pain in the ass of the globalists. Remember, that's my name. I just made my critical analysis of the reason that I think, in my opinion, from what we have seen, and that's all we see, I can't read his mind. That's what I think. And we tend to be a little bit overboard in support of him in the Second American Revolution and all that, but I actually believe we were on the brink. So when Flynn came to him early on, well, thank you. Thank you. And that's the reason that we don't seek money from anybody. We are simply speaking the truth. And if these are truth bombs or truth weapons of mass destruction or truth nuclear bombs, fine. If for some people, that's what it takes for them to awaken. you see. So we agree with you. Matter of fact, I think that the Solari report is just one of the best. Absolutely. I don't know a better, to be quite frank with you. And I personally think that that Catherine's amazing. And your question is so pointed. So let's see. The question would be answered in this way. I know. It's called the Michael Flynn Plan. I suppose that the following happened. When Roger Stone was seeing the decimation of the military by, I would throw out the number I remember, but it's such a staggering number of generals and admirals who were fired by Obama that if I threw the number out and I was wrong, I'd be so ashamed. But it's a huge number. He would press them. He would give them a crazy order. They wouldn't do it. He would fire them. They would trump up child porn on their computer. They would set them up for security violations. Anyone who stood in his way in the military was wiped out. Now, Flynn was wiped out. He thought he was safe. He thought he could be honest and say what was really happening in Syria. To this very day, no one wants to even admit when Trump stopped paying the $1 billion to Syrian ISIS rebels under whatever name, ISIS rebels in Syria under whatever name, it stopped. Okay? Flynn was right. And now look what's happening. Turkey is attacking the Kurds who are in Syria. You see, it's not going to end. It isn't what they say that it is. So, what is the military issue here? The Michael Flynn issue was, we have summarized it in report after report, but one of them is very clear because we go into pointing out that over 65 of all intelligence that should be military is corporate. So Flynn's idea was, and he went to Trump, and we believe this from things we have heard, people who were part of that group, Roger Stone, Flynn's son, and other people. Basically, Flynn came to him and said, if you do this, you can save America. It's the only way to save America. There were crazy conspiracy writers writing about this, and no one believed them. So, what was Flynn's plan? Why did they have to get rid of Flynn? Why did they set up Flynn? Why did Sally Yates put so much on the line? Why did they unmask? Why did they do the about queries that General Rogers had to go and tell in April of this year, had to do an inventory? By the way, if you see the 12-page letter out there, that's not the 4-page memo. The letter is an answer to Admiral Rogers saying, please give me an inventory of the misuse of about queries by the White House and by the FBI and by the DOJ. Yes, and he's stepping down. He was the one who came to Trump and said, you are being, we assume, because 2 days after he came to Trump, and Trump left Trump Towers and went to Bedminster to his golf course and said later that he was being wiretapped. That was General Rogers who told him, Admiral Rogers who told him that. And then Clapper and Comey and Brennan all agreed and told Trump to fire Rogers for doing it. That report is now out. That has been reported in a number of places. That's because he was very outspoken, he was radical, and he was wild. And he was a little loose. And so he got caught in one of his loose things. They knew they could catch him through entrapment. Remember, the only charge against him I would call entrapment. They took a illegally recorded conversation of his and used it against him. And he also didn't register as a foreign agent of Turkey when he was representing Erdogan. Tony Podesta, when he was called before Mueller's investigation, was allowed to, after the fact, register because he was caught for the same exact crime, working for the same exact Ukrainian 3 oligarchs that Manafort is being charged. Rick Gates and Paul Manafort are being charged with the exact same crime, not registering as a foreign agent for the exact same 3 Ukrainians. But Tony Podesta got to register after the fact, after the Mueller investigation and after he testified. So what we have here, because he lied. It's just like Jeff Sessions. Why did Jeff Sessions have to recuse himself? Because he's a friggin' old man and he didn't realize that the conversations they accused him of having Russian collusion with were recorded. He never had to recuse himself. He's just an old man. He forgets. He shouldn't be there. He's not up to the game. Flynn was up to the game. They had to take him out, so they used... First off, he made two mistakes. He got paid from RT without reporting it. Stupid. He went to their celebration dinner. He got paid. Stupid. He took his son with him, and my opinion is, they blackmailed him with his son and said they were going to charge him with these crimes unless he pled to lying to Mueller. So he did we predicted these mistakes. We predicted the second they went after Flynn, we looked into it and said, oh, they're going to get him for the following. Same thing with Manafort. But everyone knew Manafort ahead of time. If they've been trying to get Manafort back 4 presidents, 5, 6. Manafort's been around forever. He looks young, but he's got more power than anybody can even explain. You cannot explain his power to me because I've seen it and it's magic. I don't know how it works. It's kind of like John Podesta's magic. But John Podesta, we know how he does his. He blackmails people. I don't know how Paul Manafort does his. But anyway, he's going to get out of those charges. He knew that from the beginning. I predicted that from the beginning. And the reason is because they used the word conspiracy. But going back, the Michael Flynn rule was get rid of all corporate intelligence. We cannot prosecute them for treason because they are not military. So they can whistleblow, they can cheat, they can lie, they can steal it, they can give it to other countries. Let me give you a tiny example of what he was going after. Lockheed Martin has stolen trillions of dollars from the Pentagon. I can tell you how they do it. Catherine knows all about it. So go to the Solari report, folks, if you want to know how they do it. They go through the aerospace industry and the no-bid contracts. They're not quite no-bid. They just rotate them on a regular schedule so they can be counted on for the support of their bankers. But anyway, Lockheed Martin opened up their own intelligence agency, and unbeknownst to anybody, became the largest there is in America, and they get most of the contracts now. Did anybody even know that? No. And where do you think the trillions of dollars went that they stole? To set up their own, what we would call rogue CIA. Because they're stealing the money under the absolute approval of a Donald Rumsfeld, who said, I can't keep track of the trillions. They're missing. Don't ask me. Okay, that's all the trouble any of those companies ever get into. Now I can go into all of them and what they do and where they go and how they steal their money and who they use. But who do you think worked for them as their number one insider to set up their intelligence agency? James Comey. So what we're dealing with here is Flynn said, get rid of all them, get rid of the Highland Forum, and get rid of Andrew Marshall, who runs the Highland Forum, and Dick O'Neill, who now runs it. Get rid of them. They're internationalists, and they take us out of our military control of our country, out of nationalism into globalism, transnationalism, internationalism, globalism, United Nations takeover of everything. Because then they centralize, and then it goes into the pockets of a few people. So this was Flynn's plan. They had to get him out. Had he stayed for another month, he would have fired half of them. Mark my words, that was his plan. He said it. He couldn't have said it any clearer than the words that he said, and that's the reason they went after him. So that was the Flynn plan. So he had the support of the military, the fired military. The current military are still either one of two things. Scared to death like Admiral Rogers, who's quitting now after turning on Clapper, Brennan, Comey, and subsequently then Mueller, Rodstein, Andrew McCabe, James Baker, John Carlin, all of them. He turned on all of them. All the intelligence working against Trump's counterintelligence, he turned on them both when he told Trump he was being surveilled. And secondly, and by the way, I could go into the details of how that goes because we all should know them because they're out in the press and everyone has talked about them. They're nothing new. It's just that we get so overwhelmed with the mainstream media's subliminal control programming of our minds, literally brainwashing, that we can't even see the forest for the trees. So Manafort had an open tap on his phone. He was in the meetings. He practically lived at the Trump Towers. Of course he was being surveilled. I called that long before. Long before, when I saw that Paul Manafort was going to take control of his campaign, I was blown away. So he used the deep state, but he used it to his own advantage. And the Flynn plan was to get rid of all of the corrupt intelligence. And the second you do that, then you don't have to conduct bad wars. Bad intelligence leads to bad wars. Bad intelligence comes from who? That would be usually ex-British secret intelligence. Do you realize that that's where almost all of our bad intelligence comes from? And that's who Christopher Steele, who wrote the garbage Trump dossier, is ex-British intelligence. That's illegal. If he was any part of the election, that's illegal. And of course, Hillary knew it. Of course, John knew it. John Podesta, they paid for it. So what we're seeing here is they had to get Flynn out, and they had to keep Reince Priebus in because he was the ultimate leak. But you also notice that they cleaned all the bugs out of the place. That's the reason the whole White House was redone. Yeah, they said, but if you look closely, that it was scheduled, but they did the entire White House down to literally the rafters in some cases. Why? The whole place was bugged. He knew that. But it was bugged in many ways. And so you see that he got the deep state out. But the problem is when you say deep state, you have to name names. You cannot assume that it is, this amorphous, evil, demonic thing that takes over people for a possession. No, it comes down to that 7 simple falls into sin. The first one is envy.
No, don't go there.
The second one is greed. That's as far as I need to go, because that is what motivates almost every person that I've talked about that he's fighting against, including the 36. So, well, there's 7 deadly sins. That would be, it'd be lust, it'd be gluttony, it'd be sloth, anger, hatred. Mm-hmm. But there's many versions of the 7 deadly sins. But what I'm saying is, when someone who looks at the ones getting away with crimes and they get money for it, like if you want to look at the best winners in the DC swamp, that would be James Comey and Robert Mueller. Look at their wealth, and that doesn't even tell you their offshore wealth. So when you start to look at the wealth and you look at the people part of that inner group, you'll actually see that it's very, very easy to take all of them down. Very easy. Oh, heavens, yes. Evil is the word live spelled backwards. Anytime you're not living properly, you're going backwards. It's kind of like Alice in Wonderland. If you're standing still, you're going backwards. There's a lot of evil, and a lot of people will sell their soul for greed and lust. And I would say that they're worse than Satanism. Satan is only one of the demons. There are many demons, and you do different rituals for different demons. And I would say that if you want to look at the best example, look at an older organization than America. Look at the pedophilia involved in the British royalty and the British Parliament. So many were coming out so quickly of their horrifying sins that they had to pass a rule. And the rule was going to be they would reveal their offshore accounts as long as the investigations of members of Parliament into pedophilia would end. Now, we're talking of trillions of dollars that have left Britain and other countries that go into offshore accounts, and they were willing to give up that money as long as they kept their pedophilia and their rituals. And we could go into all those details, but those are very grotesque. But it's probably worse than anyone can imagine because it's on a much bigger scale. This isn't just the elite. This is anybody with money. It is inherent in the human being that is not devolving into an animal, but evolving into an angel to turn against human sacrifice. Whether that means drinking the blood, eating the heart of, the body parts of, cannibalism, or any other form of what is nothing more than a human slavery gone into the mind of a psychopath. But remember, it wasn't long ago that many religions, animistic religions, made human sacrifice. This is in our recent history. So it is, people need to understand that when you go into orders like the Masonic order, all of the Masonic orders are basically about raising the master from the dead. It's about the fact that people are scared of dying because they don't know what's on the other side. And so they use the fear of those that they murder as a tool to, they think, give them power. But what it actually does is it takes their power away. It binds them to it gives them power on the earth, but binds them to the earth. So yes, there are many, many people who've made the deal with the devil. That is not an imagination. Anyone can make the deal with the devil, but they may not be as successful as some people who were at the right moment at the right place, where the devil, showed up in his finely drawn carriage with its 6 white horses, stepped out in his fine attire and his pockets lined with gold, and makes the deal, and you sign in blood. I mean, how many... Lady Gaga said she met this individual. Have you heard this story? She says she's ill now because she made a deal with the devil. She describes it in great detail and says that the reason she is being tormented and ill now and no one can figure out what it is she made a deal with the devil, and that's the way she rose to the top. She also said that this is true for many people in the entertainment industry, and it is not uncommon in the least, and they all say the same thing. They don't really know whether that person was real or not. But they did rise to fame afterwards, and now she believes she's being tormented by the devil. Yes. Yes. And what you're saying is so right. It's so abhorrent that slavery, which has existed all throughout time, America was founded on getting away from slavery in one case, not being slaves, having religious freedom, and then bringing slaves here. And that's what the Dutch East India Company did in the South, and the British East India Company in the North. That's what really America was a fight between slavery or non-slavery. And that they turn it into pedophilia and young children. If I told you the statistics, it's staggering. It's staggering how many people a year come up missing and no one does anything about it. But Trump appointed Ivanka, put her in the West Wing of the White House, raised her up and wrote an executive order saying we're going after the pedophiles. And to my count, I think it's somewhere between, 20,000 have been arrested. That doesn't count people that they've arrested for cyber porn. That's just the physical count. And many of them, I think at least 7 of them were mayors of cities in America. And so you see all these politicians and the elite, and you see, isn't it surprising, all the top of the media industry, whether it be the pornography of the mainstream media or the pornography of Hollywood, it doesn't matter. The people who run those pornography industries are pornographers. Is it surprising they're sexual predators? Is it surprising 264 cases were settled in the Congress alone of predatory behavior from Congress people? $17 million? Here's what I predict. No one is going to agree with me on this. Matter of fact, there will be probably yells from the conclave who are listening to this as I say it. They will throw things at me, and I don't care. But you are right, Harry Blazer. The reason you're so right, I'm going to underscore how right you are. We wrote an article called Pedogate. It is not about Pizzagate. It's about the world pedophilia, which we have said exactly where it comes out of and what's it doing. So therefore, anyone who wants to know, who works in the West Wing of the White House, whose first name begins with I, would simply have to read the report and say, holy cow, we need to stop all refugees coming out of the United Nations. This is rigged. And they did. We need to stop giving the inoculation. So anyway, Ivanka. Why do you think he is making her into the queen of his dynasty? Because she's going to take down Pedogate worldwide from the West Wing of the White House. And when she does, she not only takes down the swamp and the Podestas and the Clintons and Jeffrey Epstein, who has tapes of everyone who's ever come to his island, and that's the reason the Democrats can blackmail anyone. Look at the list of the people who've gone to Jeffrey Epstein's island, who basically skirted prosecution already for his pedophilia. Bill Clinton with their 26 times without his security staff. What do you think that temple there is for? That temple of offering on Jeffrey Epstein's island is for. So all you need is the list of who went to Jeffrey Epstein's island, and the list who paid Fusion GPS, and the list of the clients of Robert Mueller's favorite law firm that he just came out of with 6 of his people in the Robert Mueller fake investigation, WilmerHale. You put those names together and you have most of the criminals whose accounts, if you seized, would probably end most of the corruption in America. So when Ivanka takes down pedophilia, whether in just America or worldwide, especially Britain, especially the Vatican, especially the $588 billion donated to the Vatican to basically continue their institutionalized pedophilia, she will become possibly, in my opinion, definitely, but possibly the first female president of the United States of America, because she will take down the evil. And when people see this, because it plucks their heartstrings more than any other thing you can say or think or do, human sacrifice based on pedophilia, you stop that, you have stopped the evil in the world. So whoever stops that would be a true leader of the world and would be recognized for everybody by that. So there's my prediction that whoever it is that stops, Ivanka or someone else, but probably from the Trump team, who would certainly continue Trump's policies and administrative ideas,